Hey YouTube, my name is Grayson Hawk, and on my channel I debate and debunk creationists, flat earthers, Christian apologists, and general pseudoscientists of all kinds, from the electric universe freaks to the ancient alien bigots. And today I am joined by one of the greatest pseudoscience debunkers and science communicators here on the internet, Professor Dave Explains. So Dave, thank you for joining me for this discussion. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the theory of everything developed by the smartest man in the world. I think you might be familiar with him, Chris Langan.
I know the guy, yeah. He's the smartest guy alive, right? So we got a lot
Yes.
of work cut out for us, right?
But before we get to the number one smartest creationist, right, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions about the second smartest, our friend Dr. Tour, because I first met you and Dr. Tour in person together at the same night at your now infamous debate in person that you had at Rice University. Yeah, so I met you both that night, and that was, I mean, I'm never going to forget that night, but it's been almost 2 years since then. So I wanted to sort of touch base with you and see, has your perspective on that debate changed at all in like these 2 years, the way that you think about it?
Yeah, well, of course, what I think doesn't change. I mean, I knew what he was. There's a lot of people who found that without any context. And you know, so for those people, hopefully they kind of can piece together what's going on. Most people, their immediate takeaway is, wow, this guy's an unhinged buffoon.
Yes.
Right? I don't know what either of them are saying, but that guy's an unhinged buffoon.
Mr. Farina, got it. Here,
what do you want me? Go. So I think that's the main takeaway from it, is that apart from all of my efforts to demonstrate his lies to the audience, right, here are ways in which he lies, and I'm proving to you that he's lying. The whole the whole takeaway from it was just him demolishing his own reputation through his own behavior. Like that's kind of the main takeaway of it. And the funniest part is just like, he's such an unbelievable egomaniacal narcissist that he kept doubling and tripling and quadrupling down and doing the Lee Cronin thing. And then he went to Harvard and he humiliated himself there. And then he kept doing these other things, and it just got worse and worse and worse for him. And then he finally shut his mouth. I think it was almost a year that he shut up and wasn't talking. I even made a point to mention that in one or two of my videos, like, James has finally shut up. And recently starts opening his mouth again. So, you know, I think you're making some, you know, you're going to do some stuff on him. I'll get to it. I have a few things in the pipeline first, but I'll get to it. And I'll do another piece on him and the dumb things he's been saying. So it's just a never ending source of hilarity, that guy.
Yeah, as you pointed out, I'm currently kind of embroiled in the middle of this back and forth with Dr. Tour about the origin of life, where I made a video debunking his dumb arguments that he brought up in your debate with him. Then he just recently, last month, made a video responding to me. Now I've made a response and blah, blah. He's right back in the thick of it. But I actually wanted to share with you a couple insights that I had from that debate and my experience that I think that you might get a kick out of from my perspective here, because I was in the audience for that debate. I asked one of the questions in the Q&A, and I'll just tell you, right? I was talking to the people in the audience around me. None of them knew who you were. None of them knew what abiogenesis meant. They didn't even know what the word abiogenesis was. They knew that they were here to talk about the origin of life, and there was some YouTuber, Dave something or something. And they were saying, is he even a professor? Do you know? And then I was like, okay, well then how did you hear about this? And they say, oh, we go to Dr. Tour's church.
Yeah.
They were like, literally everyone surrounding me, except for one individual, was a member of Dr. Tour's church, and knew nothing about the topic, had watched none of the videos in advance, just there to be a cheerleader for their guy.
I think that my one regret is that right before, like, we set up, and then we went away for a little bit, and then when we came back right before the debate was going to start, I noticed that right in that last half an hour, he or his team had posted reserved signs on the whole first 3 rows.
Yeah.
Like 60 seats. Like, this is for my camp here. I really regret not just going and ripping them all off. Like, I feel like I would have been totally justified in doing that and being like, no, buddy. Like, it was
really crazy. Everybody. I went and spoke with you after that debate happened. I asked you for some advice. You were very cordial. Everybody was wanting to talk with you. I also talked with Dr. James, and I introduced myself to him. and I asked him a couple questions about like the amyloid world hypothesis, which is one of the newer hypotheses for abiogenesis. I just want to hear, like, have you heard of it? Do you have any, anything to debunk it right now? Because you have never made a video on the subject. So I asked him about it. He said, what? No, I haven't really heard about that. I don't really know that much about amyloids. Like, he kind of was aware of what they were a little bit, but clearly has not done the reading on this, which I thought at first kind of strange for a guy that his entire niche is supposed to be positioning himself as an expert on all the different hypotheses of abiogenesis and why they're wrong.
More of an expert than the real experts, in fact.
Exactly. I mean, like, he literally, in one of the videos that he did responding to me, he was breaking down the actual peer-reviewed, published, like, studies themselves and saying, this is an idiotic scam, and only an idiot would think that this is relevant for origin of life. And he said, that the study's authors are liar, pants on fires. And he said that he feels sorry for me as a young man who has been led astray by these origin of life researchers. Like, he was trying to make it like I'm a victim and these origin of life researchers are these evil, lying manipulators.
If you're young, it's because you're young. If you're old, it's because you're old. If it's just whatever angle they can get. You know what I mean? Same with me, right? Oh, the Benner and Cronin are lying to me and I'm falling for it, right? No, they're just the only two guys that had the balls to make an appearance in my video. I talked to dozens of them, and only one or two didn't email me back. Almost everyone emailed me back, and I've had in-depth back and forths with them. And they're like, yeah, this guy's a complete fraud. Here's some papers you can use, etc.
So after his debate with you, where he was kind of embarrassed at his own university, and I think his own university was like, okay, no more of these, James. This is embarrassing for our Rice University brand. I assume that conversation probably happened. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But then after that, he has his debate at Harvard, where once again, he embarrasses himself in front of like a very prestigious institution. So then after that, right, he has not been asked to do any more public debates. Doesn't seem interested in doing any more public debates. He went totally silent. And then he, like you said, he reemerged in order to try to have a YouTube challenge to all the origin of life researchers, which again should have just been published so that they would actually see it. Nobody actually saw or wanted to engage with a YouTube challenge. Like, these are career scientists. This is not how they engage with the science. Yeah. And I challenged James to a debate, and you'll never guess what he said. I think this is the last thing I want to share with you about Dr. Tour, because I think that you're really going to find this one to be hilarious. So when I challenged him to debate, right, because I'm like, well, none of these other origin of life researchers really care about engaging with YouTube debates. If you want to actually reach the researchers, you got to publish and peer review your criticisms.
You don't understand the field well enough for me to debate you. Yeah.
It was almost that. He said, one, I only debate people with PhDs, which clearly not true. And then two, he said my YouTube channel was too small for him to engage in. So this is what I find interesting. He will only debate a PhD because he doesn't want to be viewed as lowering himself to mere undergraduates. But he will debate someone that doesn't have a PhD if their YouTube channel is larger than his own. Yeah, which just kind of shows clearly what he's actually all about, right?
Yeah, but it's also just a cop-out, right? I mean, in reality, you and I both understand the field better than he does. He could understand it if he applied himself, but he's deliberately hiding from it, right? When he says, like, to dismiss, like, I genuinely don't know a lot about amyloid world hypothesis, but to dismiss it outright is ridiculous. But he does the same to systems chemistry. There's countless times where he's like, systems chemistry has nothing to do with origin. It's like the main fucking thing that has to do with origin of life, you idiot. Like, what are you talking about? Like, the fact that would come out of your mouth, and then in the debate over and over again, just like, no, there's no self-replicating systems. No, they've never done it. It's like, dude, here it is, man. Like, what are you doing? It's all right here. Yeah. Like, you look so dumb. But
in his reasoning for why he said that he wouldn't engage with me because my channel was too small, this is what he said. He said, when I first decided to engage with Professor Dave's YouTube channel, his channel was relatively small. And after I decided to engage with him, his channel blew up. Yeah. And he was literally
reversal of reality.
He was literally trying to get credit for the success of your YouTube video, your YouTube channel. And he told me that he doesn't want me to be a success. So he said, I will not engage with Grayson because I don't want Grayson gaining popularity on YouTube from my engagement.
I I had like 700,000 or 800,000 subscribers when I made my first piece on him. He had like 10,000, 15,000, and he had 2 gigantic spikes in activity, which were specifically him responding to me. So I'm sorry, James. It's the total opposite. You used me to gain popularity. That's it.
Yeah, it is the most absurd amount of projection that I have
Yeah.
seen until this video of Chris Langan that we're about to see.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to like, because we first met with around James and all of that, I just wanted to talk to you about who I consider to be the second smartest creationist before we launch into who is
not the second smartest
numero uno. Yeah, I know. It's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek.
He's the creationist with the most impressive CV.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm being obviously tongue-in-cheek with describing him as the second smartest creationist, but yes, the first smartest would have to go to our boy Chris Langan, who has a purported IQ of over 200. So that would make him not just the smartest creationist, but the smartest man alive.
Yeah.
So, you know, unlike all these other really smart people, the ones that have these PhD credentials, high IQ individuals, you know, largely atheistic physicalists, not entirely, but largely.
People who do things, people who actually do things. Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, you look at the other, like, you know, chess grandmaster, like esteemed scientists or philosophers, and then you have a bouncer and a horse breeder. Our friend Chris. And when you actually look at this, like, as in, does he have an IQ over 200, right? Because that's his main claim to fame, right? I even heard this when I was a kid growing up. I even heard, did you know that the smartest man in the world is just a bouncer at a bar? I had no idea who he is, but the rumors trickled down to me as a kid. So
that's interesting. It never hit me. I learned about him when I found that Daily Wire video. I'd never heard of him.
So yes, after the Daily Wire video and after your debunking of his interview there, I went and did a little bit more research, and you hit the nail on the head, I think, with your video on him. It kind of exposing this is that we actually don't have any like public record of his IQ test of over 200.
He does not have a high IQ.
And I looked into this more. It was not a standard IQ test that he took. It was a different version called like the mega test or something like that. And so apparently the mega test of IQ, not a standard. It's not accepted by any institution that acknowledges IQ tests like Mensa or anything. They do not acknowledge the validity of this mega test. And apparently the mega test is designed for you to only be able to take it once. And Chris took it, failed, and then took it another time as a fake alias, and then got the score that he is now claiming means that his IQ is 200, which he got 47 out of 48 correct. The first time he took it, he got 42 out of 48. And the society that created the test would only allow genius members if they scored a 43 or higher. So the first time that Chris took this test, he did not get the prerequisite score to get into the Genius Club. And then he retook it, which you're not supposed to do. And then he got the highest test score, and then he was in the club, and then he says, oh, my IQ is 200.
Yep. That's it. That's the end of the story. He lied, and he's not a genius.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out also that this test has been like renormalized to figure out like what his score means in terms of a standard IQ test, and it's anywhere between like 155 and 174, which is still an extremely high IQ. But it really needs to be pointed out that in all standard IQ tests, you kind of ignore any score that gets above 155 because it's not reliable. Because the way that an IQ test is structured and set up, the sample size is not large enough for that high end of the spectrum. So once you get above like 2 standard deviations and you're up at like, 150, 155, 160, the results are no longer reliable. And they actually took out any IQ measurements over 160 from like the Guinness Book of World Records. They literally removed them because they're like, okay, there's no way that this is reliable. So the guy doesn't even understand the IQ test itself that he's stealing valor from.
Yeah, but also every time he speaks, you can tell that he's not a genius, right? Everything he says out of his mouth, right? He's never done anything like you said, like he's not like some chess guy. He's not an artist that makes some incredible work of art. He's never done any kind of revolutionary thing. He's never done anything. And every time he speaks, he sounds stupid. So all of that information combined equals he's not a genius, right? I'll give him, if I'm being charitable, we'll go 115, 120.
Yeah.
I think
So,
I like he's not like the dumbest he's not like he's not
Dave, you're forgetting
hard, but yeah.
you're forgetting Chris's biggest accomplishment. He has come up with the only correct theory of everything that any human has ever developed. We can't just overlook that.
By not even knowing what a theory of everything is.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's why I wanted to make this video and have you on, because your initial video about Chris Langan was dealing with that interview that he had with Michael Knowles, which blew up. It is most watched interview ever. It's got like 11 million views or something.
Yeah.
But Michael Knowles, obviously not a scientist, not anybody that's even close to a scientist. He had no idea what Chris was talking about, just like nobody else does really. But he was not even asking questions about this theory of everything. Like, they were sort of talking about aliens and politics and all this sort of stuff. And so, you know, you exposed Chris as a fraud and a snake oil salesman and a grifter for like as a totality, right? But because the interview never really dived into even what his theory is beyond any kind of surface level, I thought we could have a follow-up where we look at a different interview that he did with Curt Jaimungal. Yes, Curt from the Theories of Everything YouTube channel. This is supposed to be his most in-depth interview. It's like 4 hours long that I like watched this interview and then took these clips from to try to genuinely engaged with this cognitive-theoretic model of the universe, the CTMU. Let's see if we can actually try to take it seriously and see if it has any merit at all. Because, yeah. And so you're familiar with Curt's channel where he goes into like, he has actually like real physicists like Roger Penrose and Leonard Susskind and stuff on his channel to talk about theories of everything. And then also has the pseudoscientists like Weinstein and all these guys on and treats them all the same. Like, yes.
I'll be charitable and presume that he's just kind of, you know, gets taken for a ride by some of these guys. Maybe he has genuine intentions, like, let me explore all the ideas, right? Even the not real ideas. Obviously, I'm aware of the video. I never watched it. I was just like, 4 hours? No, I'm going to watch this 1 hour video and do a video on that. I'm not going to watch this 4 hour video.
Oh, well, I'll save you the 4 hours here. I've edited it down to just a small handful of clips that I think is most relevant. And yes, and I do think that your reading of Curt is correct. He does seem to genuinely, he even says, I spent weeks, hours and hours trying to read all the CTM literature and try to really understand this so that I can wrap my head around it and have a good interview. So he's like genuinely trying, which like, I just kind of feel bad for the guy, but so let's go ahead and start this here. So I've segregated out into segments and I've labeled like each one. So this first one is just let's see if Chris can tell us what the CTMU is. You know, what is his theory of everything? So let me know if the audio works and you can all hear this.
Why don't you give an overview of your theory for those who are uninitiated, a broad strokes view?
Well, the CTMU is a theory of everything. There are two kinds of theory of everything.
Okay, so already I'm going to be pausing throughout, but he's breaking down these two kinds of theories of everything, which, you know, in physics, there's only one kind of theory of everything, and you alluded to this in your video, but he has this other notion of a philosophical theory of everything or a metaphysical theory of everything that is not a physical theory of everything.
A physical theory. Usually it's related to a unified field theory in some way, which means the forces of nature are supposed to be unified into one general force. But of course, that's only part of reality. And my theory is a theory of everything in the metaphysical sense.
So yeah, not a theory of everything in the actual physics sense of the word, that where that term originated, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is what grifters of this type do. They want to appear as though they are speaking very rigorously about scientific topics, but then when pressed, they will retreat to the ambiguity of philosophical terminology. So it's a philosophical theory of everything. Okay, then why are you constantly talking about quanta and forces and things that are physics? It sounds like you want to have a physical theory of everything, but you definitely objectively don't and do not understand quantum theory. So everything he does is drenched in the ambiguity of a lot of this philosophical terminology, which if you spew it convincingly enough, people will go, wow, this guy's really smart. He really knows what he's talking about. Has no clue what he's talking about.
Yep. I couldn't have said any better myself.
It actually has to conform to certain logical criteria, which in philosophy and metaphysics govern what a theory of everything has to be.
Yeah. So he's saying that In philosophy and metaphysics, there's apparently some criteria for what a theory of everything must entail, and that's all he means by a theory of everything, which I have found some philosophical literature like along those lines. It's just that all of the criteria that the actual literature lays out are none of the same criteria that Chris Langan puts forward as being part of his CTMU. So yeah, he just completely getting his wires crossed.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to characterize it as the language that reality speaks to itself about itself.
Okay, so there we've got our first definition, right? We finally got all the disclaimers out, and the CTMU is the language that reality speaks to itself about itself. Does that mean anything to you, Dave?
Not to me.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me either, but yes, okay, so the CTMU is a language. Let's see if he's gonna try to explain this again and again and again until we get it, and I don't think literally anyone will ever get this.
Is a language. A language is an algebraic structure. This is a particular kind of language.
Okay, yeah, he's going a mile a minute. He's saying a language is a particular type of algebraic structure. That is just him redefining what words mean.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about a syntactical structure, right? Why would we call that algebraic? I don't know. I mean, the deeper that we delve into philosophy and logic, I'm at risk of not speaking accurately on stuff. But all I can say, it's like algebraic. Why algebraic? I don't understand.
I think that personally, he confuses mathematical notation, which you could say is a language, with math itself being a language, which I would disagree. Like, mathematical notation, you could say maybe that's a language because there's symbols and there's syntax and you're communicating like information from one communicator to another. But yeah, beyond just that, and he's trying to say that reality itself is a language, is his overall point, which
it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, the most charitable you can get is that, like, obviously logic can be expressed with math. Right. And that was the whole point of like Frege's revolution, was to take like Aristotelian logic and break it down to like a calculus, like a rigid mathematical calculus. So that's true. But that's the closest you can get to have to anything that even remotely pertains to the sentence he said. I don't see any real strong correlation there.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting around like a central theme of Chris's work, where he either makes up his own words with their own unique definitions, or he just changes the definitions of words that we all use, like language. And when Chris uses the word language, he means something that no one else means when they say language. Not any linguist, not any philosopher of language. Nobody else means language the same way that Chris means language. He's just making up new definitions for things.
Mm-hmm.
That reality actually uses to communicate with itself and to make decisions regarding how it models itself, which is another way to say how it evolves, right? And it can be modeled in many ways. You can actually look at it as an operator algebra, or as a quantization, a new kind of quantization of reality, or a reality self-simulation. You can look at it.
I just love how, by the way, like if you've read it, I actually went through and looked at Chris's papers on like CTMU and everything, and looked at his publications. It's funny how like none of those papers are modeling it in any of these ways. He's not using any kind of math, no operation.
He just says whatever he wants.
Algebra.
I mean, it's just riddled with false equivocations, right? Modeling itself, in other words, evolution. What does that mean, right? A population of organisms evolves. Are they modeling themselves? No, they're not. That doesn't mean anything. Like it's word salad. It's just word salad.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's really funny to me also where the original publication for the CTMU, his first publication in 2002, guess what kind of a journal it was in, Dave?
A non-peer-reviewed one.
An intelligent design journal.
Oh, there you go. Sure.
So it's like, it's so funny to me that intelligent design, right, as a movement in the early 2000s and like late 90s was all about pseudo-intellectualizing creationism and fundamental Christian apologetics, and just trying to introduce scientific jargon to make it sound intellectual. Yeah. And all Chris is doing that to intelligent design and a bunch of arguments from like the 1700s.
Sure. Yeah. And basically, anybody who they think the recipient, the target demographic will sound smart to, who says yes, God exists. That's intelligent design, right? Throw it in the pile of propaganda.
Yep.
That's it.
From the perspective of quantum mechanics, says quantum metamechanics, I believe.
Also, he just puts meta in front of every word that he can. Like, one of his publications is called Quantum Metamechanics. And does it involve any new math? No, of course not. Not at all.
You must have read that paper, or you mentioned having read it anyway. And once again, as a metaformal system.
And now, see, not a formal system, a metaformal system, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And the most hilarious thing is later on, he's going to try and define metaformal versus formal, and it's so funny.
Like a formal system, but it's a generalization of the formal system that goes deeply into the nature of language and what it takes to. Here's another way to describe the CTMU.
Okay, yeah, we need another way. We definitely need another way here, Chris. Thank you.
Pivot.
Basically, you've got a system. You've got this metaformal system, and it relates intelligence and intelligibility.
A metaformal system that relates intelligence and intelligibility. You know who the only other group of people that I ever come across that are talking about intelligence and intelligibility and relating them and going back? I mean, it's literally Christian presuppositionalists.
Mm-hmm.
They say, how do you guarantee intelligibility without God? You can't, therefore God exists. It's the most basic, low IQ presupper argument. And that's literally all he's doing, is just dressing that up.
Is trying to formalize in a pseudoscientific way the idea that that sentience is the quintessence, and therefore God exists.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to exactly how you derive the CTMU, and it's it's just it's like you've already seen this video, Dave. You already know how to derive the CTMU.
Flying by the seat of my pants here. I genuinely have not watched a single second of this video. I saw the runtime, was like, nope.
Reality has to be ontology and epistemology are coupled in this thing.
Yeah, so ontology, epistemology, same thing. All the philosophers telling you those are different, ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
So reality actually has to recognize itself and process itself. It has to do both. So that's what it does. It relates intelligibility and intelligence, which are dual quantities in the CTMU, thusly defining both of them in the recursive sense. It's a mutual recursive definition.
There you go. See, he's just clearing it up. He had to clear it up for us because it didn't make sense the first time he tried to explain his elevator pitch. But I'm happy that he could clear it up now.
Clear as day now. Continue.
Those two terms within this CTMU structure. So I know, can it even be regarded as a theory of consciousness? For example, it says what consciousness is because the way it quantizes reality.
Okay, so that was his attempt, right? Remember the question, what is the CTMU? So that was, again, and this is what he does for a living. He's written on this numerous times. He's been talking about this for over 20 years. Presumably, he's answered this question a lot, and this was the best attempt. Dave, do you feel like you are any closer now to understanding what the CTMU is?
And it's probably different every single time. No, I'm not any closer because it's not a thing. And his answer hinges on his ability to obscure the fact that it's not a thing. But it's just the funniest part to me is just he knows that people are enamored by physics, fundamental physics. So he can't stay away. He's always using words like quantization and things like that. That's physics, right? So he wants to pretend that it's a physical theory of everything, but he's always just using vague philosophical language, right? Somebody who has a legitimate theory of everything in physics, in theoretical physics, will be able to describe very concretely, okay, look, we're trying to, unite these fundamental forces here. Here are the particles that they're the force carrier particles of this unified force, whatever. Like, they can speak very concretely and very mathematically about what their work is. And so recursive this and intelligibility, it's just like, dude, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's more than a little ridiculous, but really, and this is this part where Curt tries to clean up what he just said, right? Because Curt is in the same seat as we are. I think he has an undergraduate degree in physics, so he understands physics more than a layperson, but he's not a PhD. But like, still, anybody should be able to hear what Chris just said and say, that doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of calling him out on that, I just really hate that what Curt does here.
Yeah.
Is that enough?
Yeah, let's start from what's most fundamental and then how you work your way up from there.
Oh, wait, sorry. This is actually a good question. It was after this that he does the thing I was saying. My bad.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a good question. He said, "What's the first thing?"
Break it down, big boy.
Okay, well, the theory is developed by a means called logical induction. You start with, you've heard of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, right? Cogito ergo sum, which is I think, therefore I am. And you've heard of Berkeley's esse percipi, okay, which is basically to be is to be perceived or to perceive, right? You start with perception and cognition. Then you develop the minimal model of how cognition and perception work. Then you induce an overall system that works by those processes.
Okay, so that was his explanation for how he derives the CTMU. So he starts with Descartes, the cogito, I think, therefore I am, and with Berkeley, who was like a philosopher in the 1700s, who had like basically this argument for idealism, right? That all of the normal objects that we interact with or know are ideas that we're interacting with in our head. And like basically saying that in order for something to exist, for something to be real, it must be perceived or it must perceive. So it's like an argument for idealism from, again, the 1700s. Mm-hmm. And in order for Chris to even begin with the CTMU, both of those arguments have to be true. Like you have to just take those as granted that they are the case, that is true, mm-hmm. which obviously have huge problems with, because most contemporary philosophers do not accept the validity of Berkeley's argument.
Mm-hmm. But also, yeah, right. Of course, I mean, prior to the evolution of sentience, there were objects that were not being perceived, right? So, yeah. I mean, but more importantly, yeah, like we're in the 21st century. How are you going to talk about cognition and perception without talking about neuroscience?
Yeah,
like what are you doing? Like we know what brains are now. Start there. That's an idea, right?
Yeah, because like there's, we have basically demonstrated, right, that mind, at least neuroscience has currently demonstrated, our current knowledge of science, that the mind is generated by the matter of the brain. And it's mm-hmm. not that the mind is generating all of the matter of the world. Because here's the thing, right? In order for Berkeley's argument to be true, right, in order for all ordinary objects to be mental objects, therefore, anything that exists must be perceived. Therefore, the universe exists. Therefore, God must exist to perceive it. That's the argument, basically. Is right, in order for Berkeley's first two premises to be true, God has to exist. So either you see, hey, actually, I don't really have a reason to accept Berkeley's first two premises, and I can reject these premises based on things like intersubjectivity, the successful track record of scientific realism, the entire existence of neuroscience as a field, like all of these things would allow us to reject Berkeley's premises. But no, in order for those premises, those have to be true. Therefore, God has to exist. That's all of that is contained within Berkeley's original argument. But Chris is literally just making the exact same argument based on the exact same sets of metaphysical assumptions. But he's just changing all the words around and obscuring it with all of this like complex jargon.
He's taking what would be a somewhat valid discussion in a sophomore year philosophy class, right? This could be a conversation between a student and a professor in a class, and he's pretending that it's like this revolutionary theory of everything that encompasses scientific phenomena and philosophy. It's kind of ridiculous.
So I took this from his website here, where he says, suppose that you're wearing blue tinted glasses. At first, you think that the world you see them through is blue. Then it occurs to you that this needs not be true. Maybe it's the glasses. Given this possibility, you realize that you really have no business thinking that the world is blue at all. Indeed, due to Occam's razor, you must assume that the world is chromatically neutral, not blue, until proven otherwise. this is his first example to try to tell us about what Berkeley's premises are, saying that everything is mental because we have to perceive the world through our cognition. We cannot perceive something without it going through our subjective experience. Therefore, Berkeley is saying there's no such thing as matter, and that everything in the world is just mental. And so this is the blue tinted glasses. If everything we're looking at through our blue tinted glasses looks blue, then should we assume that the entire world is blue? Or should we say we can't make an assumption because we can't take off our glasses? And Langan goes on to say that this can never be proven because you can never take off the blue tinted glasses because you can never perceive the world without a perception, right? It doesn't, it's like inherently you can't be done. So therefore, Langan says, the distinction itself is meaningless, and there's no reason to even consider a distinction between that which is mental and that which is not, since nature has conspired to ensure that such a distinction will never ever be perceived. But without this distinction, the term mental can no longer be restrictively defined. Mental might as well mean real, and vice versa. So that is literally all of the CTMU is resting on that logic.
Right. Yeah, it's a slippery slope towards solipsism, pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's like, look, I mean, I mean, it's like I said, like this is a discussion that could be happening in a sophomore year philosophy class. Like it's, I mean, I understand like the point of that exercise of thinking about that. It's a perfectly valid thing to talk about, but it's not rigorously scientific. It's not a theory of everything, right? It's not, definitely not anything substantive.
Yeah. Like even the Descartes' cogito, like it basically is tautological because it's like assuming I am doing the thinking. Like it says I think, therefore I am. But like it's literally circular. You have to already assume that I is the one doing the thinking for I to exist. So
I always took that statement to mean the only thing I can be certain of is that I exist. Because if I were to not exist, how could I be contemplating or perceiving, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so like there have been numerous philosophers that have tried to amend it is like the only thing that we can be certain of is that thinking happens and therefore thinking exists, but you cannot, or that you could say that first person experience exists, but then you cannot infer from that the existence of some sort of I that is independent of the things that you're perceiving. So basically, like numerous philosophers has pointed this out almost immediately from the 1600s, all the way through Nietzsche and Bertrand Russell, and everybody has been pointing this out. But yeah, Chris Langan just takes both of these as axiomatically true facts and then builds the rest of the CTMU, assuming that both of those things are true when both of those things are like don't even have strong philosophical consensus around their validity,
even for the time. Yeah, let alone
even for the time. And yeah, I would. The last thing I would just say on this is like, other than just intersubjectivity, the fact that people can have perceptions of things that are hallucinations and don't correspond with anything in, any kind of mind-independent reality. I would say that the successful track record of scientific realism is really hard to explain in this sort of idealistic
outside of a context of an objective external reality. Yeah,
because you'd think, why would it be that science, which is making the assumption that there's a mind-independent objective reality, why would that assumption lead to so much empirical success if it's not true?
Right, unless solipsism is true. And it's like that's the point. It's like it's okay in this thought experiment way and be like, I believe this weird thing, like I believe the external world doesn't exist and I'm gonna have faith in that. It's like, fine, that's fine, whatever, do your thing, but like stop pretending you have this incredible theory of everything when it's just like he's just a guy, he's a delusional narcissist who skimmed some philosophy textbooks, said, I'm going to use this jargon and pretend I'm better than all of this, and made a thing that's the totality of all of it, and then just spew a bunch of words out to see how many people I convince that that's the case. That's all it is.
Exactly. Let's just continue on a little bit because I really think these clips just get funnier and funnier.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the way you get to the CTMU. It's called logical induction. Been using that terminology for years.
Wow. Did you come up with that? The word induction?
He literally is claiming to have come up with logical induction himself. Look.
It's superior to empirical induction, by the way. Most scientists use empirical induction, which means that they just kind of guesstimate, inductively guess what the proper theory is and sort of affix that, sort of glue it on to the observations that they make. That's how science usually works.
Yeah, they make observations to corroborate, right? I mean, it's always so like he's not the dumbest guy in the world. Like the problem of induction is a real thing that you learn about in the philosophy of science. So yeah, that's a real thing. But like, he doesn't know how science works. He's never done science. He's never studied science. He doesn't know what scientists do. He doesn't really know what a theory is in a rigorous way. Right?
Well,
He just
this is him making up words again, right? And actually, this is a combination of him making up words and changing the definitions of already accepted words. Because, like, the process of induction is a logical process. To say, like empirical induction is not logical induction, it makes
it's a false dichotomy. Yeah, you're applying logic when you do empirical work.
Yeah. There's no such distinction as logical induction versus empirical induction. Those are not proper terms that anybody's making a distinction between. You use logical induction empirically. Yeah. It literally makes no sense what he's saying here, but he's literally just making up these terms and then saying, I invented logical induction.
Yeah.
This logical induction thing is a more precise process, more general process.
See, if I was interviewing him right here, I would be like, okay, give me a concrete example of logical induction and give me a concrete example of empirical induction, contrast and compare them, right? And then he would just flounder and change the subject.
This was the part earlier where I was trying to criticize like Curt's interview here, where I would say like somebody needs to call like Chris out on the things that he's saying and like hold his feet to the fire or ask even like a follow-up question at all instead of just taking for granted that everything he's saying is true and genius, and if you don't understand it, you're just not smart enough. Because that's the perspective he seems to take, because like look at how he responds to the nonsense that we just heard.
The more technical
you want to know what's funny though too is that people do. So if you go to this video, the comment section of this video and say anything about him, he personally replies within like an hour and just like insults them.
Oh man,
like really voraciously. It's really funny.
I took a look at the comment section and I was just so disheartened by humanity. I just had to leave immediately because like the comments were like, the things he's saying right now sound like they're totally made up, but in 300 years, I'll bet that this guy will be studied. It's like,
studied as a case study in delusional narcissism. See, delusional narcissists respond to delusional narcissists because they too want to be validated by this narrative of like, I've found that he wants people to believe he's found this supreme truth. And then there are people who want to feel that, by proxy, they've received that truth as well. And they are elevated by it too. So it's just a big old delusional narcissist convention when this stuff happens.
And for those who are listening, as a first pass, you don't have to understand all of the terminology. It's much better. I think Wheeler said this, or Wigner, I'm not sure which one. He said that people are trying to drink, but the point is to just get wet. And then another quote that I like is from von Neumann, who said, "You're not supposed to understand math, you get used to it." So that's in a similar vein.
This is what pissed me off so much, is like implicit in bringing up these quotes from physicists describing physics and math as being hard to understand. He's then obviously setting up the analogy that what Chris is saying is equivalent to things like quantum mechanics or mathematics. Like, he's setting
you don't understand high-level physics and you don't understand Chris, so they must both be awesome, right? But the irony is that Chris does not understand math at all, right? In the Daily Wire one, he tells this story about going to first semester in college and taking calculus class, which, by the way, like, that you're dumb, that someone's dumb when they pretend that calculus is high-level math. It's like, dude, we learned this stuff in high school, man. Like, calculus is what people who don't understand math think high-level math is, right? It's the beginning of intermediate math, right? Children learn it. But he tells some story about, like, a obviously made-up story about going to see the professor, and is like, well, what is an infinitesimal? It's like, dude, like, or actually he was doing it in a disparaging way, as though to suggest that like the concept of an infinitesimal is meaningless and how ridiculous it is. It's like, dude, I learned this when I was 17 years old. Like, what are you talking about? You don't understand what like, can you do an integral? Like, I would love to see him take like a 12th grade calculus quiz. I don't think he could do it. So
no, I mean, I looked at his quantum metamechanics paper. I looked at his CTMU publication. Like,
no math.
No math. I mean, this man is not doing linear algebra at all.
No. He might be able to do like, you know, like middle school algebra, like, you know, one equation, one unknown, like two unknowns.
And you could see too just how happy it made Chris to be compared to, like, oh wow, the things Chris is saying are the equivalent of high level math and physics. Like, this is stoking up his ego so much. So yeah, here's my next clip, because in your video you made this this outlandish claim, Dave, that Chris is just making up these terms, and so let's see if there's any truth to that. If he's just making all this up on the fly, like literally just as he's talking, he's just making all this up. Let's see if there's any evidence for that in this interview.
A lot of people criticize me because, well, you know, basically, you're like those old medieval philosophers who used to, you know, pontificate on the number of angels that could dance on the head of a pin. You're trying to derive everything from logic, but really, the world is experiential. It is the logic of experience. To derive the CTMU, you start with experience. You start with cogito and esse. Okay, you start with Descartes and Berkeley. You take those. You take cognition and experience.
Interesting.
You logically induce the minimum model, the bare minimum that you need to make cognition and perception work. Then you form an identity incorporating that potential, and you have the CTMU if you do it right. Okay? A true rationalist.
Show us.
Right?
He's about describing a thing that's not real and then not showing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's about to say that a true rationalist would be able to derive the CTMU. So therefore, he's the only true rationalist?
Knows how to do that right. Okay? But there aren't very many yet.
I love
As in there's only one.
You said,
yeah, he's the only Scotsman too.
Yes, exactly. So then, okay. And then here's where Curt is gonna unintentionally call him out on literally just making all of this up mid-sentence.
The logic of experience. I don't think I've heard that phrase before. Did you just come up with that on the spot, or have you heard that before?
First time I ever said it. I've never heard it.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I mean, Chris is just making all of this up as he goes along, introducing entirely new terminology on the fly.
Yeah, I don't think he realized how dumb it was that he answered it that way, because he's pretending to be like summarizing in some profound way this thing he's been working on for decades. Yeah. And then he's just like, oh, I just said a thing I'd never said before.
Right?
Yeah, thanks for admitting that you just make all this shit up. It's proof too. And like, he's kind of like, the thing is, he only takes these softball interviews, but even the interviewer sometimes gets under his skin simply by asking for clarification. And Knowles did it that one time. Only one time in the whole interview, and Chris immediately got agitated. He's like, well, what is it that you need? You know, I already explained that. It's like, yeah, you just know that you can't even repeat the same dumb shit that you just said because you were just in a flow state saying random words, you know?
Yeah, I was egging, I was kind of critiquing Curt a little bit for his interview here for being too softball with Chris and not holding his feet to the fire enough. But right here, this is my favorite thing that Curt does in the entire interview. And he does it a couple times. I just took one example. He takes a sentence that Chris has said before and puts it on the screen, and then has Chris translate that sentence into English. And it's the funniest thing. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Let's get to one more of these abstruse sentences.
Abstruse sentences.
Maximal generality, in brackets, universality, comprehensiveness, criterion of a reality, theoretic identity, or ontologically necessary and sufficient theory of everything, means that a fully general formal structure must be selected as the skeletal identity of a total framework.
I mean, you gotta love it.
You can see him like very attentively reading, because he's like, wait, what the fuck did I say? Oh,
yeah.
God.
He's trying to decipher this just as badly. We'll just let him go here.
So let's break down some of these terms, term by term. Maximal generality.
Comprehensive.
Okay, so why don't you just say comprehensive? I don't know, Chris. But by the way, I'm writing his translations to this so that we can translate the entire sentence at the end into English and figure out what the fuck he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, reality theoretic identity.
I mean, when you know what an identity is, that's something as which that thing exists. Okay, basically that's its identity. You exist as a secondary teller. That's part of your identity. Any property you can assign to yourself, that's part of your identity.
Reality theoretic? What
No,
about that part?
he said, what's a reality theoretic identity? And he says, oh, well, an identity is this.
Oh, also, he doesn't understand, like, he loves the word identity and he loves the word operator, and he tries to use identity operator. And I actually regret that I didn't include this part in my video, but he's talking about like God being the identity operator. And it's like, dude, do you know what the identity operator does? It takes an input and spits out an unaltered output. So it does nothing. So you're saying God does nothing when you're saying that God is the identity operator. Like, the guy he genuinely doesn't know what these terms mean. Like, it's ridiculous.
But his God is literally only there in order to perceive all of reality, or else it can't exist. Because remember, he said, in order to exist, it must be perceived. So in order for all of reality to exist, then something must be perceiving all of reality all the time. And this is God.
Yeah.
And he has the funniest thing, like, you know how the intelligent design advocates, they changed the word God to intelligent designer. And Chris goes even more crazy with it, to where his God is an acronym, G-O-D. And he actually doesn't like it if you call it God. He wants you to call it G-O-D, like he wants you to say G-O-D or the global operator descriptor.
Global, so we're limiting it to Earth?
You mean global as in all of reality, the entire universe.
Okay,
So,
I don't see how you derive the totality from the word, like global refers to the globe, which
because it has to start with G.
Universal is what you.
It has to start with G. It has to be
It has to
G-O-D.
start with G. It wouldn't be as punchy. I mean, it's just the most mental masturbation I've ever seen for the justification of theism, right?
Yep.
Like, just believe in God and say, I have faith. Yep. End of story. I'm not going to argue with you. Okay, you believe there's a God and you have faith in that, and that's the end of that. Not a problem with me. See you later, right? Instead, it's just all this bullshit.
Yeah, like, just believe in your religion or believe in your faith without trying to justify it by making up a bunch of pseudoscience, and we're all good.
That's right.
Fully general formal structure. Is that related to the metaformal structure you mentioned earlier?
This is the funniest part for me.
Yes, sometimes I use formal for metaformal because
sometimes I just say the words that are. Sometimes I just say formal instead of metaformal because,
which means that metaformal doesn't mean anything. That's
he's literally just admitting. Oh, sometimes I use both of those words interchangeably. Sorry.
Metaformal system is, intrinsically a metaformal system, but by virtue of its description. But I have to write that description down in a formal way. Okay, and it's really ought to be written on a piece of paper, and you kind of add the metaformality to it with your own by understanding what it's saying. But it's written down on a sheet of paper, and that makes it formal.
So
he's metaformal, but then when you write it down, it's formal.
Yeah, no, so he's saying that what makes something formal, right? He said that the necessary criteria is a fully general formal structure. And he's like, what do you mean by formal? Oh, I mean, it's written down on a piece of paper. And then he said, oh, what do you mean by metaformal? Oh, that means it's formal, but I'm looking at it and I understand what it means. So it's metaformal. That's what we just heard. Yeah, it's literally that bad, where this man thinks that, like, he has offered a formal theory of everything because he wrote it down.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, he's doing his best to, he knows what he said doesn't mean anything, so it's difficult to justify the things that he said, right? So, I'm sure he's sweating bullets.
Yes. And now we're going to get to the very final one that's highlighted here, which I think is the very easiest one to understand. Like, what is meant by skeletal identity, right? Like, just the bare bones, minimal framework, the core, right? I mean, it's very easy to understand. Listen to this man try to explain what skeletal means.
It's a form as opposed to the content of the form.
All right. And then skeletal identity.
Skeletal means that it's just a set of invariants in which, without interfering with those invariants, there's a lot of variability. Reality can vary, can change, can adapt, okay, without disturbing its essential invariants. So those essential invariants are skeletal reality.
Okay, did you get that, Dave?
So it's invariant, but it's also variant, and there's a skeleton in there somewhere.
Yes, the invariable invariants that can they don't vary when everything else is varying. That's what makes them skeletal reality.
It doesn't vary when it's invariant, and that's
Yeah.
that's the bones, and then the variance on top of that is the not bones.
Yes. Yeah, perfect. We're all on the same
Got
page.
it. Totally good.
You flesh it out.
Must a theory of everything explain mental activity?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to include that at the end because it's like he could just ask, must a theory of everything explain blank? He's just going to say, yeah, it's a theory of everything. Like
That's what it means. Everything is a part of everything. This is a theory of everything.
It's like, so can you explain consciousness? No. Oh, so can you explain how the strong force unifies with the actual weak forces and gravity? No. Okay, but it's part of your theory, right? Yes. And okay, so what annoyed me though there, and I wanted to play it uncut because instead of I thought this was a great idea, having Chris translate his own nonsensical bullshit. But then at the end, right, you should then come and say, okay, now let's piece it all together and figure out what that sentence is supposed to mean. And that's what never happened. We got each individual term translated, but we didn't piece it all together.
No,
so
of course not.
I'm going to try to do that right now, right? I'm going to try to piece all this together. So here's my translation of that sentence. Let me go back so we can have it on the screen so that we can get a little comparison there because, yeah, I think we kind of need one. Okay, here we go. Let's get it on the screen here.
And we would be an example of a teller.
Oh, wait, what? That is not at all the right. My bad. Here we go. Okay, so now it's on the screen, and I will read to you my translation. The most comprehensive criterion necessary to identify an actual theory of everything means that its core framework must be written down.
Yeah.
That seems to be the essence of what he's actually trying to convey here. Is that
if you don't write it down, it's not real.
Yeah, which is like he's literally not saying anything at all. Like, I mean, this is like my entire central criticism about why the CTMU is debunked and why it's failed is because it literally is just redefining terms and coming up with completely new words in unnecessarily complex ways that doesn't add any explanatory power or new information at all.
No, it's like but this is the only grift that's available to him, right? Weinstein did one that doesn't mean anything, but it's got a lot of math in it.
Yeah.
Right. So you'd be like, oh crap, there's math, it's like I can't debunk it by myself, right? I had to get a physicist to be like, yeah, this is crap. But yeah, this is child's play here.
So if we go to the next one here, oh wait, I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. So is Chris even using real words correctly? Not the ones that he's making up, but let's see. This is only a 30-second clip. There's one word in here that set off red flags for me. Let's see.
Why can't it just be that there are multiple universes?
And what he's saying here doesn't matter so much. He's just being asked about the multiverse and why that's impossible.
So we can call that all the collection of universes one meta universe or one large universe and call that the true universe, let's say.
Well, that's what the CTMU does. The CTMU incorporates something called a syntactic metaverse. But in terms of how do all those universes that you're talking about putting them all together and collecting them into a set.
Actually, I'm really surprised he didn't say syntactic meta multiverse.
How does it exist? Why? It's the reason. You need to justify it, otherwise it's pointless to hypothecate their existence.
Hypothecate?
Hypothecate. Yes, you can't. It's a pointless to hypothecate about that.
Wow.
Which at first I wasn't sure if hypothecate was even a real word, so I looked it up, and it is a real word. And
okay, enlighten me.
Hypothecate means to pledge as security without delivery of title or possession. So in a sentence, she arranged.
I'm sure he meant that.
Yeah, in a sentence, she arranged to hypothecate her half of the equity to pay for the charter.
That's definitely what he meant. I thought we were going to harp on syntactical, but hypothecate really takes the cake. But yeah, syntactical. I mean, okay, there's a bunch of universes, and he's trying to analogize that to word order in a sentence. Why? What are you doing?
I know. I mean, he literally says things like, "Oh, well, you can't have a multiverse because then you have like an infinite regress, and you can't have an infinite regress because there's no first cause." It's like, well, definitionally, there's no first cause for an infinite regress, so you're not saying anything new there either.
Yeah, stunning.
Okay, and now here's an example of like this part is the most in the weeds that we're ever going to get into the CTMU. We are going full bore into Chris's made up vocabulary here, so I'm not expecting us to understand much.
And we would be an example of a teller.
But this is an example of Curt actually doing his homework, and like Curt is trying his best here to actually understand this theory of everything.
Yes.
And what are some other examples? I heard God or God is the ultimate teller. Then we're almost
global
like
operator descriptor.
And then fundamental fermions, let's say, are a tertiary level. So is that correct? Okay, and explain
those are tertiary syntactics.
So explain that there are three levels of syntactic operators or tellers.
Right.
Okay, so why, first of all, why do you split them up?
Also, it's really funny that there are three words here that all mean the same thing. Syntactic operators, he has made a portmanteau of to be like syntactors, and then that's the same thing as tellors. So it's all just, he keeps making up new words to all say the same thing that isn't actually a thing.
Okay.
And then explain what it means again once more to be a syntactic operator.
You know, they're just scales. There's scales of coherence in causation, in structure and causation. Just basically, you have the universe. The universe is closed. It is one unary entity. That's your primary quantum.
Okay, so that's the primary quantum is the whole universe.
The whole universe is the primary quantum. That's the dumbest sentence he said so far.
Yeah, because the funny thing about quanta, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Dave, is that they can't be reduced anymore. You can't have a fraction of a quanta, which I don't know. Maybe we just I can't describe a fraction of the universe. There's no
fractions of one pixel apparently.
There's apparently no parts to the universe. No. The universe is not composed of parts.
Wow.
Yeah. But now everything, it's got to be self-composed because there's nothing external of which it can be composed. It has to use itself as its primary, as its secondary and tertiary components. So
which also makes sense.
To map itself internally by descriptive endomorphism or de-endomorphism to tertiary syntactors, and then those tertiary syntactors can agglomerate, can come together in organisms.
Okay, so let's just figure out where we're at right now.
Agglomerate?
He's literally just saying that the tertiary syntactors, which remember are fermions and fundamental particles in his model, all he's saying is that these come together. He said God makes these come together to form secondary syntactors, which are minds, like us. So it's literally just Genesis with the most complex pseudo-intellectual jargon you could ever put onto the events of Genesis.
Yeah. While skipping over particle physics, chemistry, biology, right? All of the things we actually know that describe how particles come together to form larger structures, all the emergent properties.
While not saying a single new thing. Not one piece of new information here. This is like 2,000 plus years old.
But like my favorite part, like grifters like this will never go more than a few sentences without saying quantum or something like the word quantum, because that's the number one magic buzzword to get people to be like, what? Oh my God, quantum something. This guy's he knows what he's talking about. So that digs him into a deep trench because he's continually, like if you're going to talk about quantum theory, then it's very rigorously delineated what your theory of everything needs to do. And you don't do any of that shit, not even close. So just shooting yourself in the foot by saying quantum a bunch of times.
Oh, don't worry, Dave. He is about to debunk all of quantum mechanics for us in a few sentences. This one simple trick that physicists hate.
Create secondary quanta or tellers, which are necessary to complete causation.
Also makes no sense what he just said there, but he just said that the fundamental particles need the tertiary syntactors need to come together to form us minds, which he says are necessary to complete causation, which means that causation was never completed before human minds. But I thought that God was why I thought like the entire reason, the entire logic was that God is necessary to complete causation, and that's why God is necessary. But now he's saying that's why we're here, even though God is already fulfilling that role and making us like totally.
He needs us.
It makes no sense.
We're so powerful.
I'm genuinely trying to steel man the CTMU here, and I don't understand why the secondary level is even required in his theory. I don't think there's any reason for it other than, hey, humans exist, so I have to explain it somehow with my bullshit.
Rule of threes.
Yeah, the rule of threes. That's it exactly. It's like it's a triune model.
Triangles and shit. Yeah, Holy Trinity.
Yep,
right?
That's got to be it.
Because ordinary quantum particles don't have what it takes to actually decide on events and emerge in events.
This is one thing he has said as well, is that the tertiary syntactors do not have free will because single particles don't have free will. They can't make decisions. But secondary syntactors like us, we do have free will. And when asked why, he just says, well, it's like a level of complexity, and at some point the tertiary ones get into complex. They get so complex that they just
It's the theory of everything, right? So describe to me the mechanism by which we have free will and constituent particles don't. So what's the primary syntactor? God?
Yes.
And so then what is a syntactor?
It's a portmanteau of syntactic operator, which means that it is any entity in the universe that is capable of processing the language of reality. That's that self-referential, self-modeling language or whatever. So he says that there are telos, telons, and syntax, and like that we are tellers, and then we have goals like of future states that we want, and those are telos. And that in order to relate them, you need syntax. It's like it's another trinity thing.
Okay. So he's describing sentience to fundamental particles, and he's also putting all of those things in one category, meaning we are divine, essentially.
Yeah. No, he says that basically fundamental particles are like
sentient.
It's panpsychic to some degree, but he says that they are not sophisticated enough to have free will, but they are conscious.
Right. So they just live in this tortured state of like, oh shit, I'm a proton.
Yeah.
Or I'm a quark and I can't do anything, but I exist and I know everything that's going on.
And then he has some arbitrary level of complexity with absolutely no math or any sort of rigor to justify it about, eventually, if you have enough of these tertiaries, you get a secondary and that one has free will for some reason because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That takes telesis. You've got to have this other kind of quantum of causation, this secondary quantum of causation called telesis, and that means
so now we've got a secondary quantum, this time of causation, which are the telos, which he says anything that a teller desires is a telos. So like he said that the universe exists to increase utility, and utility is anything that the tellers want. It's
also a quantum. This is a smaller quantum than the big quantum.
Yes, it's a secondary quantum, which for some reason is more fundamental than the primary quantum, which was literally the whole universe. Yeah.
Telesis is bound. That's the monic substrate of the universe. It must be bound by these things called telos.
Okay, and also he's saying that the fundamental substrate of the universe that the universe is composed of is these telos, which are just like our desires and stuff. And that tellers are necessary to bind all of these teloses together to create the universe, which of course is saying that God is necessary to bind all this together for the universe.
Right. It's just an assault on materialism.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it uses the exact same arguments against materialism as Berkeley did in the 1700s. Literally unchanged in form. It's only changed in the words that he uses to describe the argument.
Got it.
We are tellers. We actually bind telesis in this way so that causation can be completed, so that events can actually occur. All of this nonsense about, quantum randomness and quantum indeterminacy. If something is totally random and indeterministic, there is no reason for it to occur, and it won't occur.
There you go. Quantum indeterminacy debunked.
Not real. Yep.
He literally said that if something is indeterministic, as in if it can't be completely deterministic of A will always lead to B, if it's probabilistic, like A 30% of the chance has a chance of leading to B, then it just can't be that way. It can't be real.
Yeah, the probability distributions can be rigorously calculated. That's the thing. He clearly has never took. Yeah, he didn't he didn't go to college, right? I mean, I learned this in quantum chemistry, right? So
yeah,
as an undergrad, right?
Yeah.
All right. It's not just the principle of insufficient reason that I'm talking about.
The principle of insufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason would be, I don't know. I don't know if that's a new thing that he's just made up or if he's just misremembering.
Or if he botched it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he could have botched it, or this could be just a new term that he made up 5 years ago, and at this point, it's impossible to tell.
Okay.
I'm talking about something has to be distinguished from its logical complement, right? And that basically that act of distinction, it takes a certain amount of information to complete that. So we are the ones who provide that information, either directly or indirectly.
What is meant when you say that tellus is bound, that we bind it?
Well, basically, we're quantifying it. We're logically binding it using.
What is it meant to bind it? Oh, well, we're logically binding it.
Something analogous to quantifiers and predicate logic.
And now he gives us an analogy for what it's like because he can't give us a definition.
So the events occur.
And the only reason I'm playing this part at the end here is because I find Curt's follow-up question to all this to be one of the most hilarious questions he asked the entire interview. And I'm not even going to play the answer. I just think that his question is so funny as a follow-up to all of this that we're hearing.
Okay.
In other words, we're binding it into events. We're taking something that is basically conspansive, that is self-potentializing. It consists of potentials and actualities, and actually giving those potentials and actualities something to connect them.
Conspansion, by the way, is another made-up term that combines contraction and expansion. Two opposites.
We're actually selecting many possible futures, or from many possible futures, which is a potential. We're then selecting specific events that combine, that are related in telons, which are these quanta of causation we're talking about, secondary quanta.
Oh, okay. I thought I had Curt's response there, but he asked him about all this syntax and then says, "How does that relate to love?"
Oh my god,
so funny. Okay, here's a really short one.
Let's just do one more because I gotta cap it at 90 probably.
Okay. So yeah, can it explain anything useful?
Can the CTMU explain leptogenesis?
Excuse me?
Can the CTMU explain leptogenesis? So
leptogenesis?
Yeah,
you got me on that one.
Doesn't even know what it is, but I'll take bets on whether or not the CTMU can explain it.
Yeah,
parity between matter and antimatter, and one of the propositions is there's something called leptogenesis, which accounts for this asymmetry.
Yeah. So spoilers, since we don't really have time to go into all of that. Of course, the CTMU can explain it, and then he goes on to ask him about.
I've never heard of the word, but I know what it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can the CTMU explain? Well, let's just put it this way: if it cannot be explained within the CTMU, then it cannot be explained. The CTMU is called a TOE for a reason. Okay, it's comprehensive.
Yeah. Then he asks him about Mach's principle, and he says, "Oh yes, I know what Mach's principle means." And then he says, "Oh, can you explain that?" He says, "Why don't you remind me of how you formulate Mach's principle?"
And then, I'm sure you've heard of Mach's principle.
Yes.
Okay. What does the CTMU have to say about Mach's principle, and is it related to this intrinsic background?
All right. Maybe I better ask what your formulation of Mach's principle.
Sure.
It's just he's so easily derailed from his script, and it only happens a couple times in each interview because he takes softball interviews. But like with Knowles, like he was rambling about this, like, you know, going forwards and backwards in time, and he was like, "Well, wait, so how does that work?" And he's like, "Well, it can't go anywhere unless it has a place to go to," and it's just like, what are you talking about? He just asked you about like time, and what are you saying? Like, it's just, it doesn't mean anything, man. Like, you can really see the wheels turning when in those moments.
Before you go, I just really wanted to show you this one last one because I go through this whole thing about, is it falsifiable? Chris says, no, actually, by definition, my theory is a super tautology, and it cannot ever, by definition, be falsified or proven wrong.
which makes it completely worthless.
And the funny thing about super tautology, another made-up word, a tautology is like when you say something using different words but expressing the same idea. That's a tautology. And so Chris is saying that his theory is a super tautology, meaning he takes all the stuff about our reality that everybody agrees with. He uses different words to say all that same thing. But the reason it's a super tautology, which he defines what that is on his website, he says a super tautology is a tautology with the force of ontology, which means it's a tautology that he just asserts is the true state of affairs in the world. And that's what makes it super.
Yeah.
So you can't disprove
with
it.
cream on it, too.
Yes.
But my idea is called a super tautology. It cannot be broken. Okay, the conditions for intelligibility are realized by it, which means that if you try to come up with a counterexample, it will be unintelligible and inadmissible. My theory cannot be broken.
Finally, I get to this point where I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to show you where he said, at first I thought he made a falsifiable claim. Chris goes out and says, the universe is not expanding. And I'm like, we got him. There you go. Nailed. CTMU debunked, because clearly all the evidence shows it is expanding.
Right.
And
or provide evidence to the contrary. We definitely know you're not going to do that. So.
And then I'll just spare you the whole clip where he explains that actually it's not expanding, it's conspanding, which is shrinking and expanding. And he says that from our point of view, it's expanding, but from God's point of view, it's shrinking. And that's all he means. So again, literally no new information, no new explanatory power. He hasn't changed anything, but he's just made up some new words to make it sound pseudo-intellectual. Yeah. And so in response to this, because again, Curt actually studies physics. He's into theories of everything. He finally heard a physics claim. And so Curt finally asked the question that I loved the most out of all of this. Can you show us the calculations, Chris? So here's the response, and then I'll let you go.
Because we have telic recursion, the way that I understand that is that at each conspansion point in the manifold, over time, somehow the points are evolving and including their neighbors. And I recall you saying at the speed of light. Forget about at the speed of light, because that can take us down another route. Regardless, they're...
The speed of the rate of conspansion is usually the way.
Of course.
Okay, cool. So they're absorbing. And then that translates to a positive cosmological constant, because the universe seems as if it's contracting from one point of view or expanding from another. Okay.
He does not know what
a prediction for, I know that your theory says there should be a positive cosmological constant. Does it have a calculation as to what range it should look like?
Yes,
there's plenty of positive
I've made calculations. I'm not going to announce them here. I'll publish them first, and then we can talk about them.
Yeah, I bet you will, buddy.
And so for anyone that was curious, that was 3 years ago. There's been no publications about any of these calculations in the 3 years. Maybe he's still working on them. You know, maybe we'll see it after 5 years.
Well, but he's got to get through algebra 2 first, and then it's trigonometry, and then he's going to take calculus, and he's still in 10th grade, so give him some time.
Yeah, so basically, we won't go through any more of those clips. They were just, I had one really funny one where he talks about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and he talks about how this seems to happen with lower IQ individuals and even some high IQ individuals, that between the 130 and 150 range, where they're used to always thinking that they're the smartest in the world, and so they just can't accept that there's anyone smarter than them. And it was just, chef's kiss. The level of projection was insane.
Yeah, we know there's people smarter than us, big guy.
You know, stupid people tend to have Dunning-Kruger, right? But there is a higher IQ version of that. It's called the danger zone effect. We've been talking about it for years. People who range an IQ between, like 130 and 150, you would ordinarily think, well, it's extremely high IQ, almost up to genius range. So these people must actually have something going for them. Well, basically, it works against them, because they're right so often. Compared to the ordinary person, they almost always turn out to be smarter. This gives them the idea that they're intellectually infallible. They start to get to lose sight of their own intellectual limitations and believe that they're really what they've cracked themselves up to be. And they become insufferable at this point.
The very last clip that I was going to end it with was whenever, so Curt asks him, what do you think about Weinstein? What do you think about all these other various thinkers? And he asks him, what do you think about Noam Chomsky? Because again, Chris Langan's entire CTMU is all about how reality is a language and how he's redefined what language means to generalize language to apply it to the entire universe. And so when asking one of the world's leading experts in what languages are, Chris summarizes like, oh, what do you think about Noam Chomsky? He says, well, I've tried talking to Noam about my ideas, but he just doesn't get it. He seems incapable of generalizing language beyond his silly little confines. And he's like acting like, yeah, Noam Chomsky, he just doesn't understand language like I do.
One of the most prominent linguists, if not the most prominent linguist of the past century.
Yeah.
And one of my go-to examples of a crazy smart person.
Noam was a big nothing burger for me. I couldn't, even get a conversation started. It seemed to be, he has a certain perspective on language, and it's all about, where does it come from? How do we get it? And, that's his focus. And when you try to, broaden the focus, I think that sometimes Noam just doesn't pick up on it, what I'm saying.
And he also says at the start of this, he says, the people that criticize my theory, and he doesn't mention you by name, Dave, but I assume, he's talking about people like us. He says, the people that criticize my theory, he says, are either too stupid or too lazy to even try to actually understand it. And he says, the primary criticism I get is that my theory is incomprehensible and that nobody can understand it, even the world's leading experts in all the topics I talk about. And you have to understand that they're either just too lazy or too stupid, because I can understand it perfectly well as Chris Langan.
I made it up.
I'm trying to see how what you're saying, how can I model it such that I see it completely obvious? So that's how I know I've internalized a theory. And I don't see anyone who criticizes you as attempting that.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah. And basically, they claim that it's so abstract and abstruse that they can't visualize it, and that it's impossible to visualize. That's the usual line. I visualize all of it. It's not hard for me. But, for some reason, I think it's intellectual laziness. I think it's the idea that they don't want to become involved with something that might prove them wrong or mistaken about something. There are a number of psychological factors that go into it.
I think probably my favorite clip of my entire video is when Knowles is like, who should people read?
Yep.
And is like, is there any good he's like, no, there's no good philosopher today in the whole world that's worth reading. Who should they read? Well, I think you guys should read Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. Socrates famously never having written anything down. So not only he's going to just like what like a child thinks of, like a teenager would come up with those names, like who are like the smartest philosophers ever. Okay, I think those guys. He very clearly has never even read those guys either. Yep. It's like, dude,
the only smart philosopher worth reading is Chris Langan. And at the end of this video, that is exactly the advice. Curt asks, what do you have advice for anyone pursuing theories of everything? He says, you should try to read my theory and understand my theory more. And if anyone tells you any theory that is contradictory to my theory, it cannot be true. That was his final advice.
Smelly jerk faces. Yeah.
And then Curt ends the video saying, I will continue to read to learn more about your theory, and I'll make more videos and interview you once I understand it better. And he has not made a single new video about it in 3 years. No. He's just clipped this one up.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean,
Dave,
he's just farming for content, but Chris, man, that guy hates me so much. If you bring me up to him on any social media, he's got some choice words for you.
Well, I look forward to getting my own hate mail from Chris after this video.
Yeah.
But thank you, Dave, so much for coming on. This was a really awesome conversation. So I appreciate having you. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Thanks.